The soft hum of conversation and the clinking of porcelain filled the air of the quaint cafe nestled in the heart of the bustling city. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of pastries, creating an inviting atmosphere. Margaret Thompson, or Maggie as she preferred to be called, sat at her usual corner table, sipping her cappuccino and watching the world go by through the large bay window. At 60, Maggie had a serene grace about her, with silver streaks threading through her once chestnut hair and laugh lines etching the corners of her eyes, a testament to a life lived with both joy and sorrow. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, yet something about today felt different. As she glanced around the cafe, her eyes fell upon a strikingly beautiful woman seated near the entrance. The woman, who appeared to be in her mid-30s, had an air of sophistication about her. Her dark hair cascaded in loose waves over her shoulders, and her attire, a tailored dress and designer heels, spoke of wealth and taste. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Maggie's attention. It was the way she laughed and leaned in close to the man sitting across from her, a man who was clearly not her husband. The man, Jonathan Bennett, was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, exuding confidence and charm. He was rich, no doubt, and seemed completely at ease in the woman's company. Their interaction was intimate and unabashed, as if the world around them didn't exist. Maggie's curiosity was piqued, and a sense of foreboding settled in her chest. As she watched, John stood up, excusing himself with a kiss on the woman's cheek. He walked towards the restrooms, leaving the woman alone at the table, her eyes following him with a mixture of affection and apprehension. Maggie's gaze shifted back to the woman, noticing the fleeting expressions of doubt and guilt that crossed her face. It was a look Maggie recognized all too well. Taking a deep breath, Maggie made a decision. She picked up her cappuccino and walked over to the woman's table. The woman looked up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise as Maggie approached. "Mind if I join you?" Maggie asked, offering a warm smile. The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, why not?" Maggie sat down, placing her cup on the table. "I'm Maggie," she said, extending her hand. "Emily," the woman replied, shaking Maggie's hand with a firm but delicate grip. For a few moments they sat in silence, each sizing up the other. Maggie noted the tension in Emily's posture, the way her fingers nervously played with the edge of her napkin. It was clear that Emily was uncomfortable, and Maggie didn't want to push too hard too soon. "I hope you don't mind me intruding," Maggie began gently. "I just couldn't help but notice you seemed lost in thought." Emily's eyes flickered with a hint of defensiveness. "It's just been one of those days," she replied vaguely. Maggie nodded, sipping her coffee. "I understand. Sometimes it helps to talk about it, even with a stranger." Emily let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "You're very perceptive, Maggie." "I've been around long enough to recognize when someone has a lot on their mind," Maggie said, her tone kind. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Emily raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "Oh, who's that?" Maggie hesitated, then decided to share a bit of her own story. "Me, a long time ago," she said softly. "I was once in a situation not too different from yours." Emily's eyes widened slightly, and she leaned in, her interest now fully captured. "What do you mean?" Maggie took a deep breath, her gaze steady on Emily's. "I mean that I once had an affair that nearly ruined my life, and seeing you here, with him, brought back a lot of memories." Emily's face flushed, and she looked down at her hands. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You don't have to say anything," Maggie said gently, "but I'd like to share my story with you. Maybe it will help you see things from a different perspective." Emily looked back up, her eyes searching Maggie's for any hint of judgment or malice. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll listen." Maggie smiled, a mix of relief and determination washing over her. She knew this was a delicate moment, one that could either lead to a positive change or push Emily further into her destructive path. But she had to try. She owed it to herself and to Emily to at least try. As they settled into their conversation, Maggie could hear John's voice from a distance, speaking on the phone with someone. She caught fragments of his conversation mention of a wife, a business trip, and a promise to return home soon. It was the perfect moment. John was occupied, and Emily's guard was down. "So, Emily," Maggie began, her tone soft but earnest. "Let me tell you about a time in my life when I was very much like you are now. I had everything: beauty, wealth, and the attention of a man who wasn't my husband. And it almost destroyed me." Emily's eyes widened, and she leaned in closer, her curiosity now fully piqued. Maggie took a deep breath, ready to delve into her past and share the painful lessons she had learned. She hoped that by opening up, she could help Emily see the dangerous path she was on and guide her toward a better future. The end of part 1. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Maggie took a deep breath and began to tell her story. As she spoke, the bustling cafe around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the vivid memories of her past. "My story begins long before I met Dan Harris. It starts with a small-town girl who had big dreams and a heart full of hope. I grew up in a quaint town in Connecticut, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and life moved at a slower pace. My parents were high school sweethearts who had built a life full of love and simplicity. They were my role models, and I always dreamed of having a marriage as strong as theirs. In high school, I was the typical all-American girl captain of the cheerleading squad, president of the student council, and always surrounded by friends. I worked hard to keep my grades up because I had my sights set on attending a top university. My parents worked tirelessly to ensure I had every opportunity, and I didn't want to let them down. I ended up attending Yale University, where I majored in English literature. College was an exciting time, full of new experiences and challenges. I joined a sorority, made lifelong friends, and immersed myself in my studies. It was at Yale that I first met James. James Thompson was studying law, and even back then, he had an air of determination and focus that was hard to ignore. He was handsome, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, but it was his intelligence and ambition that truly drew me to him. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment we started talking, there was an undeniable connection. Our relationship blossomed quickly. We spent countless hours together, studying in the library, taking long walks around campus, and sharing our dreams for the future. James was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: supportive, loving, and deeply committed to his goals. He made me feel cherished and valued in a way I had never experienced before. We graduated and moved to New York City, where James joined a prestigious law firm, and I started working at a publishing house. Life in the city was fast-paced and exciting. We were young, in love, and full of dreams. We got married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by our family and friends. It felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. James quickly rose through the ranks at his firm, his dedication and talent earning him the respect of his colleagues and clients. I continued to work in publishing, eventually becoming an editor. Our careers flourished, but we always made time for each other. We traveled, attended galas, and built a beautiful life together. A few years into our marriage, we welcomed our first child, a daughter named Emily. She was the light of our lives, and we were overjoyed to become parents. 2 years later, our son, Michael, was born. Our family was complete, and we poured our love and energy into raising our children. Those early years of our marriage were filled with happiness and contentment. James and I were a team, supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. Our children grew up in a loving home, and we made sure to create cherished memories, family vacations, holiday traditions, and countless moments of laughter and joy. But as the years went by, things began to change. James became more and more absorbed in his work. Late nights at the office turned into weekends spent preparing for cases. He was ambitious, driven by a desire to provide for us and succeed in his career. I admired his dedication, but it often left me feeling lonely and neglected. At first, I tried to fill the void with activities and friends. I volunteered at the children's school, joined book clubs, and even started painting again, a hobby I had loved in college. But no matter how busy I kept myself, there was an emptiness that I couldn't shake. I missed the man I had fallen in love with, the one who would surprise me with flowers, take me out for spontaneous dates, and listen to my dreams and fears. Our conversations had dwindled to discussions about the children and his work. I felt like we were living parallel lives, connected by our past but drifting apart in the present. It was during this time of loneliness and vulnerability that I met Dan Harris. I attended a charity gala alone because James had to work late, as usual. Dan was the host of the event, and from the moment I saw him, there was an undeniable chemistry. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. Our affair began innocently enough lunches to discuss charity events, then dinners, and eventually more. Dan filled the emotional void that had grown between James and me. The excitement, the passion, it all felt so intoxicating, but it was also a lie, a fleeting escape from the reality I didn't want to face. Maggie paused, her eyes focusing back on Emily. "And that's how it all started," she said softly. "I got caught up in something that felt like a lifeline, but ended up being a noose around my neck." Emily looked at her, wide-eyed and silent, absorbing everything Maggie had shared. The cafe's bustling ambiance slowly returned to their consciousness, but the weight of Maggie's story lingered heavily in the air.
As always, thanks for listening to our story. We upload every day, so make sure you subscribe to YouTube's best place for storytelling content.
Maggie looked deeply into Emily's eyes, the weight of her own past lingering in her gaze. "Emily, infidelity is something that can sneak up on you when you least expect it. It often starts with a sense of dissatisfaction or loneliness. You find yourself justifying little things, telling yourself it's harmless, that you deserve a bit of happiness." Emily shifted uncomfortably, but her eyes stayed locked on Maggie's. "Justifications?" she asked quietly. "I am not justifying anything." Maggie gave her a pitying look. "Emily, where does your husband think you are right now?" Emily's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She hesitated before finally admitting, "He thinks I'm at a work conference in Seattle, but I couldn't resist coming here to be with John." Maggie nodded. "Let me guess. He is attentive. The situation is dangerous. He makes you feel alive and wanted. You can't stop thinking about him and what it would be like for him to touch you, love you, make love to you." Emily just stared at her. Maggie wasn't done. "Why not leave your husband, Emily?" Emily's face went pale. "Why would I do that?" Maggie's expression didn't change. "Why would you stay?" Emily didn't have an answer. Maggie continued. "The problem is, Emily, you start to believe that the attention you're getting is something you deserve. That if your husband doesn't give you what you need, then you can and should get it from somewhere else. You start to think that the only thing that matters is how you feel, that your husband will always be there, no matter what." "You make it sound so complicated," Emily said, her voice wavering slightly as she attempted to sound firm. "I know what I want, and I know what makes me happy. My husband does not understand me the way John does. Why shouldn't I explore things with him? Beside, My husband loves me. He loves me enough to allow me this. Emily, no man with an ounce of self-respect is going to allow his wife to cheat on him because she is bored, said Maggie bluntly. That is not what I am saying. Emily, I am not trying to hurt your feelings. Quite the contrary. I am trying to help you understand them. Let me ask you this. If your husband found out tomorrow that you were lying about where you are, here meeting with another man who you plan to sleep with, what do you think he would do? Emily hesitated only briefly. He would leave me. It would hurt him deeply. Yet you claim that he loves you so much that he would allow you your affair with John. Emily didn't answer. Maggie continued. You say that you are just exploring things. You seem to draw a line between the emotional and the physical, that you haven't really done anything wrong since you haven't slept with John. Yet emotional affairs can be just as damaging, sometimes more so, because they cut to the very heart of your relationship. Emily looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her napkin. Maggie decided to change the direction slightly. Emily, why don't you tell me a bit about yourself? Your family, your husband? Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. Well, I'm 35. I've been married to David for 10 years. We have 2 children, Sophie and Jack. Sophie's 8 and Jack is 5. Maggie smiled encouragingly. They must keep you busy. Emily's face softened at the mention of her children. They do. They're wonderful kids. Sophie loves to draw, and Jack is into everything related to space. David works in finance. He's very successful, very driven. Sounds familiar? Maggie said softly. Tell me about your relationship with David. Emily sighed, the tension returning. He is a good man, a good father, but he works a lot, is gone a lot, and when he's home, he's often still thinking about work. We barely have time for each other anymore. It's like we're living parallel lives. How long have you felt this distance? Emily considered. Maybe a year. I cannot remember the last time we made love. Maggie nodded, understanding all too well. So when did John enter the picture? Emily glanced around the cafe, ensuring John was still on his call. I met John at a business event a few months ago. He was charming, attentive, everything David used to be. He started asking me to lunch, and I enjoyed the attention. It felt good to be noticed again. Maggie could see the conflict in Emily's eyes. It's easy to be drawn to someone who makes you feel special. Emily sighed, looking down at her hands, then looked up in defiance. This thing with John, it's not a big deal. It's not like I love him. I just want to feel close to someone again. David's so distant, and John makes me feel seen. Maggie nodded, her expression understanding but firm. I understand that need for attention and closeness, Emily. But let me ask you something. What is going on with David? Emily looked at Maggie in confusion. What do you mean? According to you, he has been withdrawn, unavailable, difficult to engage. Maggie looked deeply into Emily's eyes, the weight of her own past lingering in her gaze. Emily, infidelity is something that can sneak up on you when you least expect it. It often starts with a sense of dissatisfaction or loneliness. You find yourself justifying little things, telling yourself it's harmless, that you deserve a bit of happiness. Emily shifted uncomfortably, but her eyes stayed locked on Maggie's. Justifications? She asked quietly. I am not justifying anything. Maggie gave her a pitying look. Emily, where does your husband think you are right now? Emily's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She hesitated before finally admitting, He thinks I'm at a work conference in Seattle, but I couldn't resist coming here to be with John. Maggie nodded. Let me guess. He is attentive. The situation is dangerous. He makes you feel alive and wanted. You can't stop thinking about him and what it would be like for him to touch you, love you, make love to you. Emily just stared at her. Maggie wasn't done. "Why not leave your husband, Emily?" Emily's face went pale. "Why would I do that?" Maggie's expression didn't change. "Why would you stay?" Emily didn't have an answer. Maggie continued. "The problem is, Emily, you start to believe that the attention you're getting is something you deserve. That if your husband doesn't give you what you need, then you can and should get it from somewhere else. You start to think that the only thing that matters is how you feel, that your husband will always be there, no matter what." "You make it sound so complicated," Emily said, her voice wavering slightly as she attempted to sound firm. "I know what I want, and I know what makes me happy. My husband does not understand me the way John does. Why shouldn't I explore things with him? Beside, my husband loves me. He loves me enough to allow me this." "Emily, no man with an ounce of self-respect is going to allow his wife to cheat on him because she is bored," said Maggie bluntly. "That is not what I am saying. Emily, I am not trying to hurt your feelings. Quite the contrary. I am trying to help you understand them. Let me ask you this. If your husband found out tomorrow that you were lying about where you are, here meeting with another man who you plan to sleep with, what do you think he would do?" Emily hesitated only briefly. "He would leave me. It would hurt him deeply. Yet you claim that he loves you so much that he would allow you your affair with John." Emily didn't answer. Maggie continued. "You say that you are just exploring things. You seem to draw a line between the emotional and the physical, that you haven't really done anything wrong since you haven't slept with John. Yet emotional affairs can be just as damaging, sometimes more so, because they cut to the very heart of your relationship." Emily looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her napkin. Maggie decided to change the direction slightly. "Emily, why don't you tell me a bit about yourself? Your family, your husband?" Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Well, I'm 35. I've been married to David for 10 years. We have 2 children, Sophie and Jack. Sophie's 8 and Jack is 5. Maggie smiled encouragingly. "They must keep you busy." Emily's face softened at the mention of her children. "They do. They're wonderful kids. Sophie loves to draw, and Jack is into everything related to space. David works in finance. He's very successful, very driven." "Sounds familiar," Maggie said softly. "Tell me about your relationship with David." Emily sighed, the tension returning. "He is a good man, a good father, but he works a lot, is gone a lot, and when he's home, he's often still thinking about work. We barely have time for each other anymore. It's like we're living parallel lives." "How long have you felt this distance?" Emily considered. "Maybe a year. I cannot remember the last time we made love." Maggie nodded, understanding all too well. "So when did John enter the picture?" Emily glanced around the cafe, ensuring John was still on his call. "I met John at a business event a few months ago. He was charming, attentive, everything David used to be. He started asking me to lunch, and I enjoyed the attention. It felt good to be noticed again." Maggie could see the conflict in Emily's eyes. "It's easy to be drawn to someone who makes you feel special." Emily sighed, looking down at her hands, then looked up in defiance. "This thing with John, it's not a big deal. It's not like I love him. I just want to feel close to someone again. David's so distant, and John makes me feel seen." Maggie nodded, her expression understanding but firm. "I understand that need for attention and closeness, Emily. But let me ask you something. What is going on with David?" Emily looked at Maggie in confusion. "What do you mean? According to you, he has been withdrawn, unavailable, difficult to engage." Emily nodded. "Yes, that is right. So you can probably see why I am—" Maggie interrupted her. "Emily, have you asked him why?" Emily shook her head. "Not really. I've tried. It's like he's in his own world." Maggie sighed. "Let me tell you more about Dan." Maggie took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting the weight of her memories. It was a warm summer evening when I met Dan Harris at a charity gala. James had to work late, as usual, and I felt a pang of loneliness as I walked into the grand ballroom alone. Dan was the host of the event, and from the moment our eyes met, there was an undeniable spark. He was tall, charismatic, and had a way of making everyone around him feel important. I remember him approaching me with a charming smile. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Dan Harris. I don't believe we've met before." "Maggie Thompson," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, and his eyes lingered on mine just a moment too long. Throughout the evening, Dan found ways to engage me in conversation. He complimented my dress, asked about my interests, and genuinely seemed interested in what I had to say. It was refreshing and flattering, especially since I had felt so invisible in my own marriage. Our initial flirtations were innocent enough. We exchanged contact information under the pretense of discussing charity work. But as days turned into weeks, our conversations became more personal. Dan would text me throughout the day, little messages that made me smile and feel appreciated. We started meeting for lunches, and those lunches turned into dinners. Maggie paused, looking at Emily to gauge her reaction. Emily was listening intently, her expression a mixture of curiosity and empathy. "The attention and validation Dan gave me were intoxicating," Maggie continued. "For the first time in years, I felt alive, wanted, and seen. It was like a drug, and I couldn't get enough. Despite the guilt gnawing at me, I justified my actions. I told myself that James was too busy for me, that I deserved this bit of happiness." Maggie's voice softened as she recalled the turmoil she had felt. "But the affair fog is real, Emily. It's a state where everything with the other person seems more exciting, more intense. You start to believe that this new person is the answer to all your problems, that they understand you in ways your spouse never could. But it's an illusion, a temporary escape from reality." Dan and I eventually crossed the line into a physical affair. The excitement, the secret meetings, it all felt so thrilling at the time. But with each encounter, the guilt grew stronger. I was living a double life, deceiving the man I had once vowed to love forever. Maggie looked down, her eyes filled with regret. My emotional state during the affair was a roller coaster. The highs were incredibly high, but the lows were devastating. I felt like I was constantly on edge, waiting for the moment everything would come crashing down. And eventually, it did. Maggie took a deep breath, her mind drifting back to the whirlwind of emotions and decisions that led her down a path she never imagined for herself. Emily listened intently, her own turmoil mirrored in Maggie's story. Our secret meetings became more frequent. We met in hidden corners of the city-quaint cafes, tucked away from prying eyes, hotel rooms under aliases, and secluded spots in parks where we could steal a moment together. Each encounter was charged with a mix of passion and guilt that left me reeling. I remember one afternoon in particular. We had arranged to meet at a boutique hotel on the edge of the city. As I walked into the lobby, my heart pounded with anticipation and fear. Dan was waiting for me, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. I started to run to him but stopped as spotted. Jason, my husband's brother. I ducked behind a pillar praying that he didn't see me. I was lucky. He had not. I thought my heart was going to explode. Dan didn't seem to notice. He took my hand and we hurried to our room, eager to escape the world and lose ourselves in each other. In those moments, it was easy to forget everything else. Dan made me feel desired and alive, his touch igniting a fire within me that had long been dormant. But as the euphoria faded, the guilt would creep in, gnawing at the edges of my conscience. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, torn between the life I was living and the one I was risking everything for. James, on the other hand, remained oblivious to the turmoil within me. He was so engrossed in his work, his ambition driving him to spend countless hours at the office. Our conversations became strained, filled with the mundane details of daily life rather than the deep connection we once shared. I grew increasingly distant, both physically and emotionally, as I sank deeper into the affair. I justified my actions with a myriad of rationalizations. I told myself that I deserved happiness, that James would never understand the depth of my loneliness. I convinced myself that I was entitled to the attention and affection Dan lavished upon me. But deep down, I knew these were hollow excuses, a way to assuage the guilt that threatened to consume me. The affair fog, as they call it, clouded my judgment. It made everything with Dan seem more exciting, more vivid. The stolen kisses, the whispered secrets, the thrill of being wanted. It was all so intoxicating. I began to believe that Dan was the answer to my unhappiness, that he understood me in ways James never could. But with each secret meeting, the weight of the deception grew heavier. I started to dread the moments when I would have to return home, to face James and the life I was betraying. I became an expert at hiding my emotions, at pretending everything was fine. But the cracks were starting to show, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Emily listened, her expression a mix of empathy and fear. Maggie's story was a stark reminder of the dangers of infidelity, of how easily one could get caught up in a web of lies and deceit. "So you kept going back to him, even though you knew it was wrong?" Emily asked softly. Maggie nodded, a look of deep regret in her eyes. "Yes, Emily. The affair was like a drug, and I was addicted. Each time I met Dan, I felt a rush of adrenaline, a fleeting sense of happiness that I craved. But it was never enough. The guilt and the fear of being caught were always there, lurking in the background." Emily sighed, her own feelings of guilt surfacing. "I understand that feeling, the excitement, the thrill of being noticed. It's hard to resist." "Yes, it was," Maggie agreed. "I did not resist, and this went on for almost 2 years. Emily left the cafe with a sense of determination she hadn't felt in months. It was some time later, but Maggie's words echoed in her mind as she made her way to John's apartment. It was time to confront him about their affair and her doubts about their future. The apartment building loomed before her, its modern facade a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside her. She took a deep breath and entered, her resolve hardening with each step she took toward John's door. She knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. John opened the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Emily, come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I am happy to see you. What the hell is going on? I have been texting and calling you for 2 weeks. Why did you just leave me hanging in Seattle? It was supposed to be our time." She walked in, feeling a strange mix of familiarity and unease. The apartment, once a place of excitement and escape, now felt oppressive. "I know you have questions," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I will answer them, but right now I need you to listen and hear me." John frowned, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's going on, Emily?" She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I can't do this anymore, John. This affair, it's wrong. I've been using it to escape from my problems, but it's not fair to David, to my children, or to myself." John's expression shifted from confusion to anger. "What are you saying? Are you ending this?" "Yes," Emily replied firmly. "I have to. These months have made me feel again. But it's a lie. It's a greener grass. It's a different pasture. Whatever stupid methoff you want to use. I love David. I always have. If I contune this with you, I will lose him. There is no doubt in my mind. I need to fix my marriage, not run away from it. This has to stop." John's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't just end it like this, Emily. We have something special." Emily shook her head, feeling a pang of regret, but knowing she was doing the right thing. "No, John, it's not special. It's an illusion. I need to face my problems, not hide from them. The fact of the matter is, no relationship, no matter how passionate or tense, is going to survive on a foundation like this. We are lying to ourselves and people around us. It isn't going to work." John stepped closer, his expression softening as he reached out to touch her arm. "Emily, please, we can make this work. Leave David and be with me. Let me be the one to make you happy." Emily gently pulled away from John's touch, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "John, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't just come here today to end our affair. I came here to tell you that I know the truth about you." John's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of fear crossing his features. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "I know that you're married, John, and not just married, but separated because of your infidelity," she stated calmly. John's face paled, shock written all over his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I did my research, John. I looked at reality, and that included finding out who you really are," Emily said, her gaze unwavering. John's face twisted with frustration. "You're making a mistake, Emily. You think your marriage can be fixed? David doesn't appreciate you the way I do. He'll never change. Yes, I am married, but I am getting out of it. There is no one but you." "You're right, potentially. Nothing may change with David," Emily said, her voice breaking. "But I owe it to him, to us, to try. I can't keep living a lie, and I am no longer accepting yours." John's anger flared. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away? After everything we've shared?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, John, I have to. It's the right thing to do." John's voice dropped, his tone almost pleading. "Emily, don't do this. Think about how happy we've been together. Don't throw that away." She shook her head, the tears streaming down her face. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing to do what's right. Goodbye, John." As she turned to leave, John grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "Emily, wait! Please!" She looked back at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, John. This is goodbye." With that, she pulled free from his grasp and walked out of the apartment, her heart heavy, but her resolve strong. It was time to face the consequences and seek redemption. Emily drove home, her mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming conversation with David. She knew this would be the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was necessary. She owed David the truth, and she needed to take responsibility for her actions. When she arrived home, David was in his study, working late as usual. She stood in the doorway, gathering her courage before stepping inside. She grabbed a couple of glasses, filled it with some Boubron, and brought it to David. "David, can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. David looked up, surprised. "Of course, Emily. What's going on?" She took a deep breath, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." He set his work aside, his expression growing serious. "What is it?" Emily sat down, unable to meet his gaze. "I've been having an affair," she confessed, her voice breaking. "It started a couple of months ago, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." David's face went pale, his eyes widening in shock. "An affair," he repeated, disbelief evident in his voice. "With who?" "With a man I met at a business event," Emily admitted, tears streaming down her face. His name is John. But it's over now. I ended it today. David stared at her, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. How could you do this, Emily? Why? I was lonely, she said, her voice trembling. I felt like you were always at work, and I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel important. But it was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I want to fix things, if you'll let me. David stood up, pacing the room, his hands running through his hair. I can't believe this. How long has this been going on?
Around 3 months, Emily whispered, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. I will confess everything to you. We have not slept together. It was heading that way until I realized how wrong I was.
David stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping in defeat. 3 months of lies. 3 months of betrayal. How am I supposed to trust you again? Emily felt a pang. She remembered Maggie her story about her confrontation with James. She almost smiled at the irony. I understand if you want to end it right now. I have betrayed. I have broken our vows. I am sorry. I won't make any excuses, she said, her voice barely audible. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I'm so sorry, David. I want us to try couples counseling, to work through this together. David looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and hope. Counseling? You think that will help? It's a start, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. I love you, David. I want to make this work. Please give us a chance. He sighed deeply, sitting back down. All right, Emily, we'll try counseling, but it's going to take a lot of work to rebuild the trust you've broken. I know, she said, her heart swelling with hope, and I'm ready to do that work. I'm committed to rebuilding our marriage and facing the consequences of my actions. David nodded slowly, his expression softening slightly. Okay, let's see if we can find a way through this. In the weeks that followed their initial heart-to-heart at the cafe, Maggie and Emily's friendship deepened. Maggie continued to support Emily, becoming not only a confidant, but a mentor who guided her through the rocky path of rebuilding a broken marriage. Emily met Maggie at the cafe again, their weekly rendezvous becoming a comforting routine. As they settled into their usual spot, Emily updated Maggie on her progress. Therapy has been tough, Emily admitted, but it's helping. David and I are talking more than we have in years. Maggie smiled warmly. That's wonderful to hear, Emily. It's not an easy road, but every step forward is progress. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with a mix of hope and determination. I feel like we're finally addressing the underlying issues in our marriage, the things we ignored for so long. Maggie reached across the table, squeezing Emily's hand. I'm so proud of you. It takes a lot of courage to face those issues head on. As their friendship grew, Emily found herself leaning on Maggie more and more. They discussed not just her marriage, but also their children, work, and life in general. The bond they shared became a source of strength for both women. David and Emily's journey to rebuild trust and intimacy was slow but steady. They spent more time together, rediscovering the things that had brought them together in the first place. Date nights became a regular occurrence, and they worked hard to reconnect on a deeper level. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Emily looked at David, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you for giving us this chance," she said softly. David smiled, his eyes warm with affection. "I'm glad we're trying, Emily. I think we can come out of this stronger." Therapy sessions with Dr. Brighton were filled with breakthroughs and setbacks. Emily and David confronted their fears, insecurities, and the unresolved issues that had festered over the years. During one particularly intense session, Emily broke down, confessing her deepest fears. "I was so scared of losing you, David. I felt like I wasn't enough. David took her hand, his voice gentle but firm. You are enough, Emily. We both made mistakes, but we're here now, trying to fix them. That's what matters. They experienced moments of profound understanding and connection, but also times of frustration and pain. Each breakthrough brought them closer, while each setback reminded them of the fragility of their relationship. Emily's appreciation for the strength of her marriage grew as they navigated these challenges together. She realized that the effort they were putting into rebuilding their relationship was a testament to their love and commitment. Maggie, meanwhile, reflected on her own past. Helping Emily had given her a sense of purpose and fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. She saw in Emily's journey the potential for redemption and healing, and it made her hopeful for her own future. As the months passed, Emily and David found a new rhythm in their relationship. Trust was slowly being rebuilt, and the intimacy they had once lost was beginning to return. One sunny afternoon, Emily and David took a walk in the park, hand in hand. The tension that had once defined their relationship was replaced by a sense of peace and mutual respect. I'm proud of us, David said, breaking the comfortable silence. Emily smiled, her heart full. Me too. I feel like we're finally moving forward together. Maggie watched their progress from a distance, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had helped Emily navigate one of the most challenging periods of her life, and seeing her friend find happiness and stability again was immensely rewarding. One evening, as they met at the cafe for what had become their final heart-to-heart, Emily expressed her gratitude. Maggie, I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. Maggie shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. You did the hard work, Emily. I just helped you see what you were capable of. Emily reached across the table, taking Maggie's hand. You've given me so much more than support. You've shown me that it's possible to rebuild, to find hope even in the darkest times. Maggie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. And you've reminded me that it's never too late to make things right. I'm so proud of you, Emily. As they sat there, the sun setting outside the cafe window, both women felt a sense of closure and new beginnings. Emily was ready to face the future with David, stronger and more committed than ever. And Maggie, having helped her friend find her way, felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope for her own journey ahead. Maggie sat in her office, the soft light of the late afternoon casting a warm glow over the room. She was surrounded by files and notes, meticulously organized but still overwhelming in their volume. Each one represented a story, a struggle, a journey of healing and redemption. She picked up a file labeled Emily and David Parker and began reviewing her notes. As she flipped through the pages, her mind wandered back to the first time she met Emily. It had been a challenging journey, but seeing Emily and David come through the other side stronger and more connected was a testament to the power of honesty, forgiveness, and hard work. Maggie's gaze fell on a note that had been left on her desk. She unfolded it and read the familiar handwriting. Dear Maggie, I cannot begin to express how grateful I am for everything you have done for Emily and me. Your guidance, support, and wisdom have given us a second chance at our marriage. We owe so much to you. Thank you for helping us find our way back to each other. With deepest gratitude. David! Maggie smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. She placed the note back on the desk and leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how far she had come since her own turbulent past. When I first met Emily, she was on the brink of making the same mistakes I had once made. Her pain, her confusion, and her longing for something more resonated deeply with me. I saw a reflection of my younger self in her, and I knew I had to help her. But what Emily didn't know was that her husband, David, had reached out to me first. He had heard about my unique line of work, helping women navigate the complexities of infidelity, whether it was stopping them before they made a mistake or guiding them back to their true path if they had already strayed. David was desperate to save his marriage and wanted to give Emily the support she needed without pushing her away. When David contacted me, I saw an opportunity not just to help them, but also to continue my own journey of redemption. You see, I run a special kind of business, one that aims to prevent affairs and help those who have already crossed that line find their way back. My experiences, my mistakes, have given me a unique perspective and the tools to guide others. This journey has also brought me full circle in my personal life. 3 years ago, after a series of unexpected events, James and I reconnected. We found our way back to each other after his wife, Sarah, passed away. It wasn't easy. There was so much pain and history between us, but we managed to rebuild what we had lost. We remarried, and every day I am grateful for the second chance we've been given. Maggie's eyes softened as she thought about James. He had been her rock, her partner, and her greatest source of support. They had both changed and grown over the years, and their renewed commitment to each other was stronger than ever. Just then, the phone rang. Maggie glanced at the caller ID and smiled. It was James. She picked up the phone, her voice filled with warmth. "Hi, James." "Hey, Maggie. Just wanted to check in and see how your day was going." "It's been good," she replied, looking around her office. "Just wrapping up some notes on Emily and David. They're doing really well." "That's great to hear," James said, his voice full of pride. "You've done amazing work with them, Maggie. You should be proud." "I am," she said softly. "And I couldn't have done it without you. Your support means everything to me." "We're a team," James said simply. "Always have been, always will be." Maggie smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I love you, James." "I love you too, Maggie. I'll see you at home." As she hung up the phone, Maggie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. She had found her purpose, helped others find theirs, and rediscovered the love of her life. With a contented sigh, Maggie turned back to her notes, ready to continue her work. She knew there would be more women like Emily, more stories of pain and redemption, and she was ready to help them, one step at a time.
I want to thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, I am excited to announce that this story is available on Amazon. Please download. Again, thanks for listening.